of the California Transportation Commission's May meetings. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Eager. Commissioner Grisby.
Present.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Present.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Here.
Commissioner Liu.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez.
Present.
Commissioner Tavaloni said he would be a little bit late joining us. Chair Norton.
Present.
Senator Newman. Assemblymember Friedman. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Douglas, could you please read the instructions for public comment and other items?
Thank you. I managed to turn my mic on this time. Welcome to day 2 of the May 2021 CTC virtual meeting. The Commission's meeting agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar as needed. It can also be found on the Commission's website. Commissioners, should you have any questions or comments during the meeting, please let us know by raising your hand or otherwise get our attention on your camera and wait for the chair to call on you. You can also send inquiries and comments through the Questions tab that can be read to presenters and the audience on your behalf. Please mute your microphone except when you intend to speak to minimize outside noise and feedback. The chair will do her best to call on each of you in turn. We hope that you will turn on your camera while speaking if you have one. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, every vote will need to be a roll call vote. Staff will group items for votes to help save time. Please only speak when called upon by the chair. When called upon, state your name and briefly make your point. I would please ask that no one speak a second time on any one item until everyone who wishes to speak a first time has done so. To our presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. We hope that you'll also turn on your camera during your presentation if you have one. Members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar panel likely located to the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handouts tab. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer the computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, please select the corresponding box, and the dial-a phone number, access code, and audio pin is directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio pin is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the Commission should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to specific attendees. There are 2 options to participate for participants to provide comments on the agenda. The preferred option is to use the raise hand, click the hand icon, indicate that you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and any affiliation you may have prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the Questions tab. There you can type in if you would please type in the agenda number that you're commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise with any comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. A timer will be may be displayed on the screen during public comments. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do acknowledge that Commissioner Guardino is now on, as well as Commissioner Eager. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. And today, as we were able to get through so much of the agenda yesterday, we are going to start with item 12 and then move the Self-Help County Coalition Executive Director presentation. Then we're going to move to item 73, which is the HOV degradation and managed lanes. And then we're going to go through the balance of the agenda, items 98 through 148. I just wanted to make sure that the public tuning in for this meeting understand where our agenda is going to go today. And thank you very much for being here and being present. We'll now hear from Keith Dunn. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Chairwoman Norton and Commissioners. I appreciate you allowing me to have a little leniency with my schedule. We got tied up in some committee issues yesterday in the Capitol. The self-help counties continues to be active and looking to be active participants within a number of the policy rollouts that the state is performing these days. CAPTI specifically, we have a number of, it was 25 agencies. So we kind of run the gambit, as you know, from the very small in San Benito to Los Angeles. So we have a wide range of constituencies. Each individual agency is providing comments to CAPTI. I think collectively as a whole, we're trying to focus on, and I was very pleased yesterday to hear Director Omashakin say, you know, promises made, promises kept with regards to SB1 and the implementation with that program into the new policies that the state's rolling out. I've been advised that perhaps the self-help counties should look to somehow get a copyright on that just so that we don't lose it to the state. It's a catchy little motto and we're very proud of it. But promises made, promises kept has really been the focus and success of the self-help county effort. And that really means looking at what the voters had approved and making sure that we're complying with the will of the voters when we're implementing those projects. So I think that you'll see as comments continue to come in on CAPTI and the implementation of 743 that the focus from the self-help counties is a great appreciation in the efforts to move us into an equitable and transformative new infrastructure with an eye to making sure that we're keeping to the promises that we made to voters when we got approval for our sales tax, which has been noted in a number of cases. It's about $190 billion over 30 years. So this is a huge, huge boon to California. Transitioning from there into the federal reauthorization, we'll be participating, the self-help counties, with Director Omashakin and his efforts and Secretary Kim to make sure that California is in the best position to receive as much federal funding as possible. We plan as a self-help counties for our role in that process to again make sure that we're leveraging the local dollars that California brings to the table when President Biden comes out completely and Congress ultimately approves their Build Back Better program. California is in a unique position, as you all know. When you show up with extra revenue, you tend to have a better opportunity of collecting more as Washington starts assigning those dollars. We will be participating in the first meeting, I think it's the 17th, a week from next, or I guess next Monday, with the department, and look forward to actively pursuing as much funding as California can attract. I think that there'll be plenty of time to debate where those go, how they're spent, but our mission really is to make sure that we're in a position to help the state attract as much resources as possible. There's 49 other states that are competing. We realize that and want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure those dollars come back here to the Golden State. Self-help county specifically in the legislature, you know, it's another COVID year, so it's a different time of interacting with the legislature. We're hoping that's going to get back to normal, but we've got a couple proposals that we are very involved with and supporting and sponsoring a bill to renew design build authority for local agencies who work on the state highway. We feel that this is a program that has been effective and saved time and money in the delivery of infrastructure for our county taxpayers as well as the state of California. So Assemblymember Daley is carrying a bill that would extend that program an additional 10 years past the sunset. We're also very focused in trying to build upon our partnership with the department in a manner that would allow us to be active participants and partners more often. And one of the ways that we're pursuing that is to try and put an extension on the cap of indirect costs that we as counties are charged when we do work with the state. And basically what that is charges for the lights and charges for a vehicle and different things. We still would pay for the direct costs, but the indirect costs we feel should be capped at 10% and maybe eventually go away. And we feel that that has encouraged our partnership with the department, and we're looking forward to having that hopefully included in this year's state budget as the authority runs out at the end of this budget cycle. So other than that, we're looking, I get asked quite often about the Focus on the Future conference, and what I would tell individuals and tell the commission and those listening today, we're in the process. It's supposed to happen in San Francisco. We're in the process of talking to not only the California Department of Public Health, but also folks in San Francisco and the hotels, and trying to figure out if that's realistic or not. I hope to have an update at your next meeting on whether or not we're going to return to a virtual forum. My guess is it's highly likely that Focus will be virtual again this year, just to edge on the side of safety for everyone. But I hopefully will have an update for folks at the next CTC meeting on the status of that event. Past that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And again, Chairman Norton, thank you for your indulgence and letting me jump this morning to your meeting. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. It's always important for us to hear from you, and we want to thank you and your members for taking the time to really focus on CAPDI and address some of the issues that are pertinent to all of you. I see that Commissioner Inman has logged on, so I'd like to recognize her for her comments.
Thanks. Good morning, Keith. Thanks for the update. Question on the FAA issue. How do you read the likelihood of us succeeding with that? Can you give us a little update?
Yeah, so for folks that may not be as familiar, there's a change in an interpretation of a rule a few years back from Congress on how aviation fuel sales tax was directed and required to be spent. Congresswoman Napolitano had in the past introduced legislation that would set back the rule as it had been interpreted for the previous 27 years. She had they were in the minority party at the time, and the bill didn't go anywhere in the House. We've had several discussions with her office and Congressman Lowenthal, and I'm not going to remember who else we spoke with, but it hasn't gone away. We're still kind of having those discussions. I think with the change in leadership in Congress, specifically in the House, I'm feeling more optimistic. That said, congressional politics are what they are, and there are competing interests that would like to see the current rule interpretation remain. So what I would tell you is we're actively working with Congresswoman Napolitano's office, who's been fantastic. I think that the flexibility that was provided in the initial interpretation of that rule is the accurate rule interpretation. So whether or not we end up having a standalone piece of legislation or something that's tied into a larger budget or infrastructure package remains to be seen. But we're encouraging Congress to return to the original interpretation of giving some flexibility in how those dollars are spent.
Thank you. Since it's kind of the season when all our business organizations are doing their outreach work, I think it would be good if you have a one-pager on it. If we can help you share that, so at least everybody, we have a chance to share our thoughts on that, it'd be good, because I know, at least in SoCal, almost every organization is doing their federal briefing shortly, if they haven't done them already.
Yeah, we'll update that and get that out. I really appreciate that comment, Chairman Inman, and we will, I'm guessing I know the folks who are doing the organizational outreach with Congress, so I'll get it to them. And again, we're not trying to dictate if it's a bill or a law, but rather, include it in a larger infrastructure package. Sometimes it's a little easier to put it in than to try and run a bill through the process, but we'll follow Congress's lead, and we really appreciate that input.
Thank you.
Keith, I had a question for you, and we had talked about this last time, and maybe you can have the data for us next month, but because self-help counties are so dependent on sales tax revenue, we just wanted to know, especially as the impacts for COVID-19, how sales tax has been doing in your counties, and to ask for a look. We know that freight and deliveries have been up by 40%. People are still ordering a lot of things, but just wanted to get a sense of where we are in predicted revenues so that we can look at how self-help counties and your measures are doing. In 2008, in the recession, Measure R in LA County took a real hit, $6 billion in a $39 billion measure. So we just wanted to know where these impacts are happening and if they're happening in the same pain as after 2008.
Within the end of the first quarter, I will certainly solicit the counties individually. And what I will tell you is I will, to the extent that I get that information, have that report available to you at the next meeting. And I will today get a note out to the counties and see what information we can put together and have that report ready for you at the next meeting.
That's great. It's just helpful for us to know where you're going to need to have SB1 funds or other things help fill in some of these gaps, and what we're going to need to continue to put pressure on the federal side because of expected funds and those gaps you see.
Really appreciate that offer, Chairwoman, and I will get that back to you and have a report for the committee or the commission at the your next meeting.
Wonderful. And we have no public comment. So I believe if no other commissioners wish to speak, Keith, we want to thank you for coming on day 2. We really would have missed your report had you not given it. So thanks again.
Too kind. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing everyone in person sometime soon, hopefully.
Wonderful. Talk to you soon. Now we're going to move to item 73. That's the HOV degradation and managed lanes.
Yeah, I'll introduce you real quick, Joe. This is Joe on screen. So we're excited about item 73. It's a presentation that we've been trying to get on the agenda for a couple meetings now. And it will be a presentation on the status of managed lanes in California, and it'll be specifically focusing on HOV lane degradation and what can be done to address the degradation and what is being done to address the degradation. And next to me on the screen here is Joe Rouse from Caltrans. He'll be making the presentation. He's the program manager for managed lanes at Caltrans, has a lot of great information. So he's got about a 10-minute presentation, and then he'll be available for like questions and dialogue after the presentation. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Joe. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you, Joe and John.
Thanks, John. Good morning, commissioners. I know, as John mentioned, we've tried to schedule this presentation a couple of times already, and it hadn't worked out. But I'm finally glad we're able to have the chance to finally speak to you today, because I know there's been a lot of interest in this subject. I actually have spoken to the commission before on this topic, but it's been a few years, so I think it'd just be good if I could just quickly introduce myself. I know John's already kind of given you a little bit of information, but as has been mentioned, my name is Joe Rouse. I'm with the Division of Traffic Operations here at Caltrans, headquarters here in Sacramento. I serve as the statewide program manager for managed lane operations on the state highway system, and I've been doing this work for about 13 years. In my role as the statewide program manager, I work pretty regularly with Caltrans Executive Management, our districts, FHWA, CHP, and our regional transportation agency partners on a lot of technical and policy matters related to managed lanes. I also engage pretty regularly on this topic at a national level through the Transportation Research Board. I'm a member of their Managed Lanes Committee, and I also serve on what used to be called the Congestion Pricing Committee. They've changed names on it recently. So I've been pretty actively involved in this topic for a number of years. Next slide, please. I think it would be best if I could just start first by talking about what we mean when we use the term managed lanes. There's a lot of terminology that you'll hear, and it can get a little confusing, so I want to try to help clear that up. As you can see here on this slide, a managed lane is an exclusive lane, usually found on a freeway, that uses various operational and design strategies in a way that allows that lane to operate efficiently. These strategies can include vehicle eligibility, access, tolling, or some combination of those. Next slide, please. There are multiple types of managed lanes. This slide shows some of the various types that we have here in California. I think most people are familiar with the carpool lane, the high occupancy vehicle or HOV lane, diamond lane. There's a lot of terms used for it, and that's the one that you see there on the upper left. These lanes are set aside usually for vehicles with 2 or more occupants, and in some cases 3 or more. And then state and federal law also permits clean air vehicles to be able to use the lanes, as well as toll-paying vehicles, and we'll touch on that as we continue through this presentation. The high occupancy toll lane, or HOT lane, hot lane, which is shown right below that HOV lane picture, That's the HOV lane that is open to toll-paying vehicles which don't meet the occupancy requirements. The vehicles that have the required number of occupants can use the lane for free. The toll varies to help manage the demand in the lane. It's called congestion pricing. I don't have a photo of it here, but another type of toll lane that we use is called an express toll lane. And on these lanes, everyone who uses it has to pay. Vehicles that have a certain number of occupants may be able to use it for a discount, but everybody has to pay. You may be familiar with these new lanes that opened on I-15 in Riverside County between the 91 and the San Bernardino County line that opened a few weeks ago. Those are express toll lanes. Bus-only lanes are another thing that we're also starting to see more of, and you can see in the upper right a photo of a bus lane that's been operating on I-15 in San Diego for a couple of years now. And again, we're starting to see a few more of those being proposed around the state. Finally, in a few spots around California, we've had these for a long time. We have the dedicated truck lanes, and the photo you see here on the bottom right is at the 514 interchange right at the tail end of the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And these lanes are usually found where trucks need to pass through large, heavily trafficked interchanges or up or down steep mountain grades. They're designed to allow them to do that without creating safety or operational impacts to the rest of the traffic on the freeway. Before we move on from this slide, I do want to share an important point of clarification. Hot lanes and express toll lanes are both commonly referred to as express lanes. That's because that's the terminology that has to be used on the signs per the Federal Traffic Control Devices Manual. And despite the fact that both of these types of lanes are labeled the same, it's really important to note there are differences in operational strategies, and folks need to be aware of that when we're talking about these different types of facilities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, state and federal law permits certain types of vehicles to use HOV lanes without meeting the occupancy requirements. These include the toll-paying vehicles, so those hot lanes, and then the clean air vehicles, zero emission and some low emission vehicles. The California Air Resources Board is responsible for determining which vehicles qualify for that HOV lane access, those clean air vehicles. And the DMV is the agency that issues the decals to these vehicles. There have been a number of changes to the decal program over the years in terms of which kinds of vehicles can qualify and how many can be issued and how long they last. I won't go through that history right now. I expect there'll probably be some questions on that after my presentation. But the way the program works today is that the vehicles that are shown here are eligible for a decal. Those decals are good for 4 years from the date of issue or September 30th of 2025, whichever date comes first. DMV selects a new color for decals each year, and there's no limit on the number of decals that can be issued. Next slide, please. Federal law includes a performance standard for these HOV lanes that are used by the toll-paying or clean air vehicles. And in short, the average speed of the vehicles using the HOV lane during the weekday morning or afternoon rush hour periods cannot go below 45 miles per hour more than 3 times a month. It's a little bit more complicated in that in federal law, the way it's written, but that's basically what it means. Any HOV lane that fails to meet that standard is considered degraded. I want to be clear that this performance standard applies only to HOV lanes that are open to the toll-paying vehicles, so those hot lanes, and it applies only to HOV lanes that are open to the clean air vehicles. Any vehicle that is normally would be exempt from meeting the occupancy requirements. The other types of managed lanes facilities that we showed in the pictures earlier, they are not subjected to this federal requirement. We are required to report the speed data to the Federal Highway Administration every year and identify those HOV lanes that are degraded. Our agreement with FHWA is that we will collect and analyze the average speeds of the vehicles using the HOV lanes during the time blocks of 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. every weekday during the second half of each calendar year, so July 1st to December 31st. We made that decision based on the fact that the volumes do tend to be a little higher in the second half of the year. That had been our historical trends that we had seen. And so we agreed that that should be the area of focus, the time of the year that should be focused on. Well, when we report on degradation, we break it down in terms of how frequently it occurs. And if the speed goes below 45 miles per hour between 10 and 50% of the time during that 6-month reporting period, that facility is considered slightly degraded, and so on. We do this because it helps us to identify those HOV lanes that have the most significant performance issues. Next slide, please. So federal law requires states to come back to FHWA with plans to bring these degraded HOV lanes back into compliance with that performance standard. These plans must be submitted to FHWA within 180 days from when we identified those lanes as being degraded. And we must make a good faith effort to implement these plans in order to avoid sanctions. Those sanctions could include withholding payment of federal funds and withholding approval of projects. I want to be clear that Caltrans is always reviewing and analyzing HOV performance, regardless of this federal performance requirement. And we can and we do make adjustments as needed. Some of our districts have established working groups with their local CHP and their regional agency partners, and they meet on a regular basis to review HOV performance. And they'll identify and implement changes that may need to be made. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a table that shows degradation in 2019. And as I said, we measure degradation both in the morning and in the afternoons. So about 26% of HOV lanes were degraded in the morning and 40% of HOV lanes were degraded in the afternoon. This has been the trend for years. It's always been more degraded in the afternoon. The morning figures are about a 6% increase. They increased about 6% from 2018, and the afternoon figures were up about 9% from 2018. I know some of the commissioners were interested in looking at degradation trends for the last several years, going back prior to 2018. I do want to make it clear that we made some significant changes to how degradation was collected and measured in 2018. And while it is possible to look at those trends, the changes in our data collection process that we made in 2018 make it difficult to really do a good comparison between data collected before and after 2018. So I'm sorry I'm not able to show you a greater picture of the trends over time. I do not want to cause any confusion by showing that and causing questions that way. I will note that Caltrans is still in the process of developing our report for 2020, but based on the preliminary analysis, it was clear that COVID-19 had a very significant impact on HOV performance, just like the rest of the state highway system. We've seen about a 50% reduction in degradation compared to 2019. Degradation was actually still observed in a few spots, mostly in Southern California, and as historically has been the case, mostly in the afternoon. Degradation was almost completely eliminated in the morning in a number of the state's urban areas. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a couple of maps from the 2019 degradation analysis, that second half of the calendar year. The map on the left shows degradation in the Bay Area, Caltrans District 4. The map on the right shows degradation in Orange County, Caltrans District 12. You can see, looking at those colored dots, that about a third of the HOV lane mileage in District 4 was degraded, and about half of the mileage in District 12 was degraded in 2019. We also noticed that several of the same routes show up year after year in our degradation analyses. These include Interstate 80 there in the Bay Area between the Bay Bridge and the Carquinez Bridge, Highway 101 in Santa Clara County there through Silicon Valley, I-880 in Alameda County showed up for a number of years, Highway 99 in Sacramento, and of course in Southern California, a number of routes, 405, Interstate 105, 210, 215, and most of the freeways in Orange County. You go to the next slide, please. So what are some of the causes of degradation? Well, the main cause seems to be demand exceeding capacity. And I often tell people that the HOV system has become a victim of its own success. Other causes include some of the constraints at the access openings, particularly down in Southern California, where we use that limited access, those points where people can get in and out of the lanes. A lot of times, congestion in the adjacent general purpose lanes, because of the high demand and bottlenecks, that's also a common cause. And when the traffic in the general purpose lane slows down, we often see the HOV lane traffic slowing down too. We also know that there are some HOV lanes where we have pretty high violation rates. Next slide, please. So why is it so important to address degradation? One of the main reasons for having an HOV lane is to provide a dedicated lane for carpools, van pools, and transit that flows faster than the adjacent freeway lanes. Those who use the HOV lanes can get to their destination sooner and in the same amount of time every day. They get that reliable, faster trip. That reliability is the incentive for people to use those modes, and this in turn helps us to be able to achieve our climate and VMT reduction goals. Degradation affects that reliability, and when that happens, that incentive to carpool or use transit goes away, and there's a domino effect from that. HOV lanes that don't provide an incentive above traveling alone in a general purpose lane are not performing as originally intended by the state. When the legislature wrote the laws that authorized HOV lanes on the state highway system, this was back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, they said that it was their intent to, quote, stimulate and encourage the development of ways and means of relieving traffic congestion on California highways, and at the same time, to encourage individual citizens to pool their vehicular resources and thereby conserve fuel and lessen emission of air pollutants, end quote. HOV lanes are and will continue to be an important part of the state's plans to reduce VMT and GHG emissions. Millions of federal, state, and local transportation dollars have been invested in this element of the highway system, and this investment does need to be protected. Next slide, please. So I'll close out by highlighting some of the things that we are trying to do to help address degradation, some of these things that are included in our degradation action plans. The action plans, for the most part, focus on improving the operation of the HOV lanes themselves. The purpose of the federal degradation standard is to ensure that HOV lanes continue to do what they were intended to do, which is to provide that reliable trip for those who carpool or use transit. So as I mentioned previously, this reliability provides an incentive for people to switch to those modes. Federal law actually lists several different options for addressing degradation, and all of them involve some type of capital or operational change to the HOV lanes themselves. FHWA has really encouraged us to focus on these and other related improvements that are expected to have a direct impact on the HOV lanes. And so with this in mind, we have a heavy focus on trying to improve that available capacity in the HOV lanes, free it up to increase the speeds. This can usually be achieved by increasing occupancy requirements or by adding capacity. We recently released some guidance on when to look at changing the occupancy requirements. And so what we're saying now in this guidance is that once degradation reaches a certain level, you need to at least start looking at it. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to do it, but we want to start looking at it. We're also looking to add pricing as an additional operational strategy. So converting these HOV lanes to hot lanes to help more effectively manage that HOV lane and also provide more choices to travelers. When you allow those toll-paying users to access the HOV lanes, it can provide congestion relief to the general purpose lanes, as the people would now have the option to use the lane if they're willing to pay and if there is capacity available. The priority on these hot lanes has been and will always be HOVs, and the number of toll payers is controlled by using the toll based on the amount of space available. That congestion pricing concept that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about hot lanes. And if the demand gets too high, the lanes can be restricted to only HOV lanes, just strictly to HOV. And we do see that happening a lot on the hot lanes that operate in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles. Conversion to a hot lane can also help address the impacts of occupancy changes. So if we just increase the occupancy requirements on the HOV lane, it may help the HOV lane flow faster, but it could also result in more congestion on the general purpose lanes, because now some motorists who were previously eligible to use the HOV lane would now no longer be eligible. So if you convert the HOV lane to a hot lane, when you increase occupancy requirements, it will allow those motorists to have access again. They'll need to pay a toll for it, but they'll still be able to use the lane if they so choose. The toll revenues generated on these hot lanes are also used to help cover the cost of building, operating, and maintaining the lanes. And then if there's excess revenue left over, we reinvest it to fund different things to help improve the corridor and other things such as alternative modes. There are a number of different options that we could look at in terms of reinvesting those revenues back in the corridor. In some cases, we may want to add a second lane. We could either add a second HOV lane to an existing HOV facility, or we could convert the existing HOV lane to a hot lane and add a second hot lane. If you're familiar with the I-405 project that's underway in Orange County, that is exactly what they're doing. I will acknowledge that lane additions will be a bit more challenging with the implementation of SB 743, and that is something that is being talked about extensively right now within the department. Next slide, please. And this will be my last slide. Some of the other strategies that we're looking at include expanding the use of ramp metering to help manage the overall demand on the freeway. We're also looking at adding auxiliary lanes either on the general purpose lanes or at the access openings that I mentioned earlier on the HOV lanes to help the motorists be able to get in and out a little easier. Ramp metering and auxiliary lanes on the general purpose lanes can help reduce that freeway congestion, which in turn can improve the speeds in the HOV lanes. As I mentioned earlier, when the GP lanes usually slow down, the HOV lanes slow down along with it. I'll also note we work on a regular basis with the CHP to identify those HOV lanes that have significant issues with violations, so they can focus their enforcement efforts on those locations. And then finally, we're in the process of standardizing our managed lane striping and pavement marking practices so they're consistent across the state. And we're doing this because we expect that this will help improve driver awareness of the lanes and hopefully reduce some of those violations that I just mentioned. And this concludes my presentation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share this info with you, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
That's great. I wanted to talk to you about some of these challenges because this is a very important issue for us. First, I wanted to ask why flyovers aren't in your strategy as a way of connecting up carpool lanes and managed lanes to managed lanes. In LA County, the 110 to the 105 is a great connector, and it's one of the reasons that people are taking those managed lanes is because of the ease of connecting from carpool lane to carpool lane, and they're willing to pay for it. And I live near the 134, and part of the reason that there's degradation is not because there needs to be more occupancy, but in fact, because people who are going to the carpool lane on the 134 cannot make it across to connect to the 5 freeway because, as you point out, the people in the general purpose lane are moving too slow, and so it slows everything down. Whereas a connector, a flyover, could be an optimal solution to keep carpool lane to carpool lane, etc.
That's a very good point. I think the main concern with the construction of flyovers is that they would be rather cost prohibitive in some cases. In the case of the 5 and 134, I'm very familiar with that interchange and the layout of that interchange. It'd be kind of tricky from an engineering standpoint to be able to make that work. And I think that's the engineering feasibility of getting some of those projects done. They could probably be done from an engineering perspective, but it would be very costly. And so that's one of the reasons why you don't see a whole lot of that. Now, I will note that we do have portions of our network that do have those extensive connections. District 12 has invested a lot of money with help from OCTA and the local sales tax measures to build those connections. And the 405 project that I mentioned earlier, it's going to include some new connections as well, and they're going to take advantage of the existing connectors that have already been implemented on the freeway system. But a lot of that is just due to the cost required to build those facilities. That's why you're not seeing it.
I think there needs to be a re-examination, though, of the safety about merging from freeway to freeway and what's happening with the carpool lanes, because it's not a matter of that's a safety issue, and it really affects everything going on that freeway. And so I would just appreciate if there could be a follow-up discussion on that particular area and others where people are saying that it's dangerous to be in the carpool lanes as much as they like them and want to use them because of the merge issues and not being able to go freeway to freeway. I also wanted to ask you about the decal issue, and that is, you mentioned that is there a limit on the decals? You mentioned that they're going to be in place until September of 2025, I think you mentioned. So because that's been such a great incentive for people to buy EV vehicles and to use those EV vehicles, I just wanted to know a little bit about where you see the future of these decals and the operational benefits, because as we're moving towards EVs in 2030, we're going to need to know something about what's going to happen between 2025 and 2030.
Well, Chair Norton, as you mentioned, the decal program was initially created by the legislature as a way to incentivize the purchase and use of clean air vehicles. And it's changed a lot over the years. Initially, it was just for pure zero emission vehicles, as well as the first generation of hybrid vehicles. The legislature over time, as they've come to the realization that more of these vehicles are mainstreamed into the fleet, they've eliminated the decal program for them, and they've implemented it for newer technologies. So some years ago, the program was done away for just the traditional hybrid vehicles, and then it moved to the plug-in hybrids. And it's kind of progressed that way over time. The concern that I know that we had was that we didn't these vehicles, there was a lot of vehicles that were being purchased to take advantage of that opportunity. And I think there was a concern that we didn't want them to overwhelm the lanes. And so there have been some changes made to the program over the years, that they had caps initially on the decal program, and then they would eliminate those caps. And then some time ago, the legislature asked Caltrans to do a report on the impacts of the decal program. And at about that same time, the legislature implemented the program that we have now, which basically creates a 4-year rolling cycle. That September 30th, 2025 date is actually when the program, the federal authorization for these vehicles to use the lanes, expires. And that's really what is governing a lot of this. And I can't speak to the future of that program because I don't know what the plans are for reauthorization. I see that Vince Mamano, the FHWA Division Administrator for California, is on here, and he may be able to share some information along those lines. What I will say is this: the department does support the purchase and use of these vehicles for the purposes that you've described, and we're going to support the decal program, and we're going to examine the changes, any changes that may happen down the road, to make sure that they are in line with federal laws and requirements. And if they meet that, then we'll do our best to support it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Liu and then Commissioner Inman.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thanks, Joe, for that presentation. This is a pretty complicated issue because some of the solutions seem to be at odds with some of the other goals we're trying to do. And our chair mentioned that there's an issue with, the safety issues. And I've noticed, like, I think Orange County, you can merge in and out anywhere, but in LA County, you can't. And that was done for safety reasons. Yet you're saying part of the degradation problem is directly attributable to that merging. So I would assume that there are some studies that are being done to try to get some data to make at least a more informed decision on what options to go in those directions. But I'm also concerned because it seems to me that we're not using, and perhaps we're not even allowed to use because of FHWA, all the tools in the toolbox that when it comes to fixing the problem. And, I might be wrong about this, but it seems to me that a lot of the causes that you named, like, demand exceeding capacity and bottlenecks and congestion and general purpose lanes, as well as the HOV lanes, those solutions involve things beyond just capital investments and operational improvements. Those problems demand VMT reductions and, getting people out of cars and improving public transit, funding active transportation, building complete streets, improving internet access so people have can work from home effectively. All those solutions appear to not be on the table here. So are we trying to get at this with only half the tools in the toolbox? And I don't know. I haven't seen the data, and I'm just curious as to whether some of the solutions go beyond what you're allowed to consider or encourage to use.
Well, Commissioner Liu, let me answer your second question first. As I mentioned in my presentation, FHWA has really encouraged us as part of the degradation mitigation strategies to really focus on those strategies that will get the HOV lanes moving again because of the role that they play in helping, to encourage people to carpool and use transit to help achieve those overall GHG and VMT reduction goals. But I do want to let you know that, we are taking a broader approach as well. And we're working with our regional partners to look at all sorts of alternatives to help, encourage people to, make that modal shift. We're working with regional transportation agencies. Is there an opportunity to use, to run transit service, micro transit service down some of these corridors? Yep. I believe Director Ryan Chamberlain might be here, and he might be able to speak to some of the things that they're doing down in Orange County. But I know that these are things that are happening all across the state. Some of these hot lanes, the revenues that are being used for the hot lanes are funding transit service. They're doing that in San Diego on I-15. So we are looking at this more holistically, but In the case of the HOV lanes, we do have this mandate under federal law to get the HOV lanes moving again. And so the focus there is to look at those things that will get the HOV lanes up and running. With regards to your first question about access control, there's a lot of, to be honest, there's been a lot of review and analysis that's been done over the years on which type of access strategy is the best to use. From my perspective at headquarters, and we've had conversations with our districts about this, we have generally left it up to the districts to make that decision based on the safety and the operational desires that they have. They want to keep the HOV lanes moving, and sometimes restricting that access can help make the HOV lanes flow a little bit faster. But you do run into the issues as we described with those access openings. And so there may be ways where you can reconfigure the access a little bit to help address some of those issues that are happening there. But we're having each district just kind of address that issue on a case-by-case basis. I do know that in District 4, the San Francisco Bay Area, as they look at each HOV lane that's being converted from HOV to HOT, and they have multiple projects that they've done this on, they look at the corridor, they look at where the operational and safety issues are occurring, and they'll make a decision to restrict access in those areas or not. So they do undergo that engineering analysis, and we're working on updating our policies and clarifying what that engineering analysis should include. And we hope to release that here within the next few weeks.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I would say on a personal level, I was stuck in traffic in Orange County with my family last weekend because of the construction of these lanes. And I certainly blamed Caltrans, as I've been told to do, so that they didn't look at me as the cause of that problem.
Thank you. Commissioner Inman.
Thank you, Chair Norton, and thank you, Joe, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to be brief, but Chair Norton, I would offer up that this discussion is so important for all of us that we might want to consider an off-date workshop on this, because I think managed lanes are very much a part of a number of our RTPs and our sustainable community strategies. And so I think it really, really is important that we figure out what can work and what should work. What we haven't talked about a lot today is equity. And I just want to remind all of us that we're very cognizant of our needs to really up our game when it comes to our equity discussions. So, I think it sounds pretty simple. I'm going to go from 2 to 3 occupancy, but I want to know more about who is that really impacting? And is it the single parent? And maybe they simply can't get to work, or they can't get their child to school. So I think that, to me, there's things as necessary trips, and then there are those that are the discretionary. And I think when equity, we really have to use our equity lenses. So question on that. And then my bigger question is, Joe, every time I go to TRB, I get all inspired, and then I come back and everybody goes back to whatever they're doing. So my question of you is, what rich body of work has TRB done on this that we could all learn from? And we think we have the corner on every great idea, but maybe we don't. So I would also, if we do decide to do something more on this, to really have an update on what's happening elsewhere, what solutions have they found elsewhere, and could they apply? And then just finally, the one size fits all, I think we have to really be aware, and Joe mentioned a lot of the districts are making some of the decisions, and I think that we do need some of that flexibility in there. So I'm not sure whether there was a real question in there. I think just more of a reminder or a question to the chair.
Well, I think it's a great idea for us to follow up, and especially I think it's important for us to start examining the role of transit along these managed lanes and what the transit ridership looks like, and how those opportunities really have improved the yield of managed lanes and reduced overall VMT. And I wanted to point out that the CTC and CalSTA and Caltrans all went to the Congress to ask for net toll revenue to be able to be spent on transit operations, which I think is even more important as we're looking at how to link, as you point out with the equity item, to link, the potential for free transit along these corridors with paid driving, so that there really are these additional ways for people who are in these corridors who need the additional support, being low income, can have new opportunities and new mobility options because of the tolls that are paid. So I guess, Joe, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about whether you could come back to us with more of an examination also about what the yield in transit, because we want to see this combination of transit, microtransit, van pools, for example, in these managed lanes, and how they continue to move people better and encourage people to take transit itself.
Well, first, let me say, Commissioner Inman, I was very happy to hear your suggestion about a more in-depth discussion about managed lanes. I'm speaking for myself. I think I welcome that. I think that would be a very important discussion that needs to be happening amongst the state's transportation leaders. Let me just talk real quick about the equity issues and what some of the things that we're doing here on the Caltrans side. So we are about ready to release an update to our department's managed lanes policy, and I've been working with several members of our executive leadership team on that, and it will include a requirement now that whenever we look at implementing a hot lane, that we do some type of an equity analysis and make sure that those impacts to folks of lower incomes, that those are addressed in some way. They're at least acknowledged, and if there's a way to address those things, that we explore those options as well. The I-5 managed lanes project, which you all approved yesterday as part of the consent calendar items, there's an equity study that's going to be involved as part of that. So we are doing these things now. We're going to continue to do them. I'm sure, as our director has mentioned to you before, equity is a very large part of our focus as a department, and this policy will reflect that. I think it's also important to note, and I did not mention this in my presentation, but a lot of these hot lanes are operated by our regional transportation agency partners. And so the revenues come back to them. We work with them in terms of how we want to see those revenues used, and we're going to continue to work with them on that. And ensuring equity is going to be a big part of those discussions as we work with them on the excess revenue expenditure plans, making sure that it gets reinvested in transit and these other options that support all users of all levels and all modes as much as we possibly can. When it comes to TRB, I did want to point out one thing that has been done recently, and I speak about this with a little bit of personal pride because I was involved in it. We had a project that recently developed some national guidance just on managed lane development overall. That project was completed a couple of years ago. It identified several topics that warranted further research and investigation, and I'm helping to lead a team that's going to look at those additional questions further and help spur some of that additional research that may be needed. And that research can be funded and done through various means, various pool fund studies, university transportation centers, whoever would want to tackle this sort of thing. But that guidance came out a while back. And like I said, we're continuing to make sure that it evolves and meets the needs of today. That was I worked with my managed lane committee co-chair at the time. We had a pretty intensive discussion about this. We agreed we did not want that research project to just kind of lie stagnant. We wanted it to continue to be relevant. So we're working to try to make that happen. And I can definitely talk about that in greater detail if anybody is interested. But yeah, that's something that we are trying to do. So yes, that's hopefully that'll be a good product that comes out of the TRB efforts.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Grisby, and then I'd like to call on Mitch Weiss to talk about the potential for more in-depth conversation, especially as we're having this come up a lot in the CAPDI discussions. Commissioner Grisby?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Joe, thank you for the presentation. One of the questions I have is, we know that hot lanes and pricing can be a very effective strategy for a number of our aims. What existing structural barriers, institutional barriers are there to further having more hot lanes in the state, just from your perspective at a 30,000-foot level?
That's an excellent question. And I would like, I think, to enlist the help of some of the, maybe some of our Caltrans leaders who might be on here, but I'll share with you that I think the biggest issue that we are working through right now, excuse me, is to get some of the initial funding to get some of these projects off the ground in the first place. We have these corridors that are degraded. We think that conversion to hot lanes could possibly help with addressing some of those issues. But the challenge is getting the initial resources to get the projects started, to do those environmental and equity analyses and looking at the various project alternatives. That is our biggest challenge right now. And I know that there are some discussions that are underway internally within Caltrans to try to identify and prioritize which projects we think are most important from a statewide perspective. We're collecting a list of potential projects now, and we're going to be filtering through those and hopefully prioritizing those and figuring out which ones we want to try to seek funding for. So we're working on that, but that probably is the biggest challenge right now, is getting the resources in place to move those projects forward.
Thank you.
Mitch, could you reassign and recommend highly a further discussion on this issue, since there are so many issues relevant to this in our discussions on the CAPDI process?
Yeah, we'll work on how we can set something up.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate your in-depth presentation. And, this is a huge issue in terms of financing and moving road traffic. So we are excited that you are willing to work with us and get more in-depth in all of these issues, especially as the CAPDI process calls this out pretty significantly as our future opportunity. So we're looking forward to working with you, and just know we have been active on the federal side to look at furthering some of the goals that Caltrans has set out, because these are goals for CTC as well.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay, wonderful. Now we are going to go back to our main agenda for day 2, and we will be taking items 98 and 105 together. Teresa, thank you for presenting these to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you indicated, I will be taking 98 through 105 together, and I will be giving my recommendation after I present 105. Item 98 is an action item. This is the allocation request of a project list from the CRISA program. Happy to report that we are getting those monies out, so this will be the first allocation. Consistent with the guidelines approved earlier in the agenda, this is a request to approve the first project list consisting of one project in Mendocino County. Mendocino would like to request state exchange for these funds. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with the CRISA program guidelines. Agenda item 99 is an action item. This is the STIP allocation for a state-administered project on the state highway system. This is a request of $58,721,000 for the Eureka Arcata Corridor Improvement Project in Humboldt County. I must say this project is a partnership between Caltrans and Humboldt County, and very important project that has been in the books for a very long time, and I'm happy that it's finally coming forward for construction. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines and the program. Agenda item 100 is a STIP, it's also an action item, a STIP allocation for a local administered project on the state highway system. This request is for $196,000 for the Vine Trail Calistoga to St. Helena project in Napa County. This is an ATP project as well, and it will be requesting an ATP allocation later in the agenda. Staff has reviewed this request, finds it consistent with the STIP guidelines and the approved program. Agenda item 101 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation of 5 locally administered projects off the state highway system. The allocation request is for $7,187,000 for 1 project in Inyo County, 1 project in Mono County, and 3 planning, programming, and monitoring projects. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines and the program. Agenda item 102 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation advance for a state-administered project on the state highway system. The allocation advance request is for $92,966,000 for the Olancha-Cartago Expressway project in Inyo County. This is also a project that has been in the books for over 20 years. So I am very happy to be recommending this project at this time. This is also a project that was in partnership with many agencies, including Kern, Mono, and this is in Inyo, of course, Inyo and the state. So very important project and very happy that it is coming forward for construction now. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with the STIP guidelines and the approved program. Agenda item 103 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation advance for an AB 3090 reimbursement STIP project for $18,964,000 for the AB 3090 reimbursement project in Kern County. This project is programmed in fiscal year 21-22, so the advance is just for a couple of months. Agenda item 104 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation request for a STIP rail project for $27,800,000 for the system-wide light rail vehicle transit project in Los Angeles County. Staff has reviewed this request, finds it consistent with the guidelines and the program. And agenda item 105 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation for a STIP rail project for $600,000 for the San Joaquin Corridor second platform for bi-hourly and morning express service rail project in Stanislaus County. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with the STIP guidelines and the approved program. Madam Chair, staff recommends the approval of all these action items from the STIP program.
Thank you very much. Could we get a motion on items 98 through 105?
Abalone, move it.
Thank
Second,
you.
Commissioner Inman.
Wonderful. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez. Aye. Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. Now we'll take items 106 and 107. Matthew?
Good morning, Commissioners. Yes, I'll be presenting tabs 106 and 107 together with the final vote taken after tab 107. Tab 106 is an action item to approve a Cycle 2 Solutions for Congested Corridors program allocation request of $45,150,000 for the locally administered BART train control modernization program, specifically the switch machine cabling contract transit project. This is the first Cycle 2 Congested Corridors program allocation, I might add. So I'm pretty happy about that. This request is consistent with the Solutions for Congested Corridors program and its guidelines, as well as the project baseline agreement, which was approved earlier in the agenda. Commissioners, and so now I'll turn to tab 107. Tab 107 is an action item to approve a multi-funded allocation request for the South Coast 101 HOV Padero Segment 4B project in Santa Barbara County. This allocation request is for $63,310,000 from the Solutions for Congested Corridors program and $4,210,000 from the STIP. A total allocation of $67,520,000. This request is consistent with the Solutions for Congested Corridors program and its guidelines, as well as the 2020 STIP program and its guidelines. Commissioners, staff has reviewed both items and finds them both consistent with their respective programs. Staff recommends your approval of both tabs 106 and 107.
Thank you very much. I note that there is no public comment on either of these items, and I did want to be clear that there was also no public comment on items 98 through 105. So now, with no public comment, commissioners, do any of you wish to speak on these items? If not, can we entertain a motion?
Commissioner Eager, so moves.
Thank you.
Tabellone, second.
Excellent. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tabellone.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to item 108. Beverly?
Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 108 is an action item to approve the annual allocation of $3,411,000 for the Waterborne Ferry Program for fiscal year 21-22. This amount is consistent with the proposed Budget Act of 2021 and is contingent on the passage of the state budget. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. There are no public comment. Oh, we have a public comment on this item. Justin, can you present that public comment, please?
Thank you, Chair Norton. We have Margie Kern with her hand raised. Margie, you are free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. I didn't realize I had to raise my hand. I thought I was already registered to speak. I'm sorry. This is on item tab 107. I'd like to speak, say my name is Margie Kern. I'm the Executive Director of Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, or SBCAG. On behalf of SBCAG and the residents of Santa Barbara County, I would like to express our thanks and gratitude to the Cal STA, the CTC, and Caltrans for today's allocation of SB1 funding for the Santa Barbara Highway 101 multimodal corridor. Thanks to our partnership, investments of critical state funds and local state tax dollars from Santa Barbara County, we will now have 7.5 miles of construction underway for the final phase of Santa Barbara Highway 101 high occupancy vehicle project. We will work with the state on the final 2.5 remaining miles in Santa Barbara County and Montecito in the near future. These improvements, along with interregional bus service, our Coastal Express, our peak hour rail train service, and the gap closures on the coastal trail will increase biking, walking, and make us the poster child for multimodal corridors to give travelers multiple options to travel through from Ventura County to Santa Barbara County in a sustainable and equitable manner. Modal shift is our goal, which you had a discussion on earlier. This allocation today for Solutions for Congested Corridors, along with other state and local funds, will help create over 2,000 jobs to help California recover from the COVID-19 health pandemic. We look forward to working with the state to complete the final segments of the corridor to help realize the full benefits for travelers in our region and the residents of California. We also look forward to showcasing all the great work in our corridor when the CTC comes to Santa Barbara in the near future. So thank you again for letting me interrupt your presentation, Beverly, and thank you, Commissioner Norton, for letting me make my comments. Thank
Yes,
you.
we will recognize that your comments were made on item 107 rather than 108, but we do want them in the record. So seeing that there are no public comments on item 107, item 108, we'll entertain a motion on item 108, the waterborne ferry program allocation.
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Second by Commissioner.
Okay. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Eager.
Aye.
Mr. Grisby.
Aye.
Mr. Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We'll now take items 109 to 111 together. Kayla?
Thank you, Chair Norton. Good morning, Commissioners. I'll be presenting tabs 109 through 111. Tab 109 is an allocation request for $25 million in local partnership competitive program funds for the locally administered US 101 De La Cruz Boulevard Trimble Road Interchange Improvements Project on the state highway system in Santa Clara County, programmed in fiscal year 2021. Tab 110 is an allocation request totaling $1,072,000 in local partnership program formulaic funds for 4 locally administered projects off the state highway system in Lake, Nevada, Sacramento, and Madera counties, programmed in fiscal year 2021. Tab 111 is an allocation request totaling $1,185,000 in local partnership formulaic program funds for 2 locally administered transit projects. $1,100,000 is requested for 1 project in Napa County, programmed in fiscal year 2021, and $85,000 is requested for one project located in various counties for the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District programmed in fiscal year 2021. Staff has reviewed the requests and the items are consistent with the local partnership program guidelines. Therefore, staff recommends your approval of tabs 109, 110, and 111.
Thank you very much. Seeing that there is no public comment, commissioners, any of you wish to speak on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve, Martinez.
Thank you. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Madam Chair, I did not hear the second.
It was Commissioner Liu.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Alvarado. Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Mr. Grisby.
Aye.
Mr. Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Douglas. We'll now take items 112 and 113 together. Michael and Hannah? The T-STEP program?
Item 112 is an action item. Contra Costa County requests $18 million for the design phase of the I-680 State Route 4 Interchange Improvements Project. The project reconfigures the interchange to improve safety, reduce congestion, and improve traffic operations on the trade corridor. Staff recommends approval of this request.
Thank you. And Hannah?
Yeah, Commissioners, item 113 is a interchange improvement. It's a cycle 1 and cycle 2 project. In 2019, when we originally programmed the right-of-way and design costs, there was a $15 million savings in the right-of-way phase. And then in this year, there was a cost increase in right-of-way of $3.1 million because of increased land acquisition and site prep costs. So the implementing agency is requesting to shift $3.1 million from savings to cover the cost increase in the right-of-way phase for this project. The request is consistent with the guidelines and staff recommends approval.
Thank you very much. I see that there's no public comment on items 112 and 113. So unless we have Commissioner Davis, I'd like to recognize you.
I was just curious as to have all the right-of-ways been secured now at this point?
Actually, I don't know that. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Is someone from Caltrans on who can speak to that? I don't think that they have, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hannah, is there someone specific you want us to try to find that could speak to it?
No, it's okay. It should be easy to find out, and I can just follow up with the commissioner in an email.
I want to make sure this needs to have a right-of-way certification before, are we going to make an allocation of this project at this meeting, or is this just an amendment?
No, this is not the construction allocation. That's part of the Cycle 2 project. This is just the request to shift the funds from savings to cover the cost increase for the Cycle 1 funds, which have already, this is the allocation of the additional right-of-way costs.
Got it. Thank you.
So then we can vote on this in the way that you've presented it now, and that is your recommendation. Yes?
Right. Yes.
Wonderful. With that, could we entertain a motion on 112 and 113?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Kehoe.
Thank you. Tavaloni seconds. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Mr. Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Mr. Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much. We will go to tabs 114 and 115. These items are on the ATP allocations. Beverly.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 114 is an action item to approve allocations of $18,066,000 for 19 active transportation program projects. Tab 115 is an action item to approve an advance allocation of $54,000 for the Edenville and Sylvandale Schools Pedestrian and Bicycling Safety Improvements Active Transportation Program project in Santa Clara County. Staff has reviewed these requests and finds the allocations to be consistent with the Active Transportation Program guidelines and the adopted program. Therefore, staff recommends approval of tabs 114 and 115.
Thank you very much. There's no public comment on these items. So unless commissioners have comments they'd like to make, could we entertain a motion?
Move it, Tavaloni.
Thank
Second,
you.
Lou.
Tavaloni Lou. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Mr. Martinez.
Aye.
Mr. Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We will now take items 116 through 118 together. Casey?
Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 116 is an action item requesting to allocate $12,951,000 to 4 transit and intercity rail capital program projects awarded in the 2018 and 2020 programs. Tab 117 is an action item requesting to allocate $11,229,000 to 5 transit and intercity rail capital program projects awarded in the 2018 program. Tab 118 is an allocation amendment to split the project into 2 segments and allocate the full award amount to the project. Since the award in 2019, BART received an FTA grant that will be used for the rail procurement. Therefore, this amendment will remove the transit and intercity rail capital program funding from the rail procurement and place all funding on the communication-based train control system. This allocation amendment will allocate the remaining funds awarded to the awarded to the project with the reimbursement schedule for the next 8 years identified in the book item. Staff would like to express concerns with the TIRCP cash flow analysis managed by Caltrans. While Caltrans has resolved the issue related to this allocation, staff has ongoing concerns with the management of the cash flow spreadsheet and that of the TIRCP program. Staff would like to work with Caltrans on improving their methodology. Staff recommends approval of tabs 116, 117, and 118.
Thank you very much. We have no public comment on items 116 through 118. And commissioners, unless you are wishing to speak, could we entertain a motion on this item? These items, these three.
So moved, Kehoe.
Thank you.
Second, Eager.
Thank you very much. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We'll now move to item 119. Alicia Sequeira.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 119 is an allocation request for the Short Line Railroad Improvement Program. This is an allocation request of $400,000 in Short Line Railroad Improvement Program funds for the Santa Maria Valley Railroad Track Rehabilitation Rail Project in Santa Barbara County and is programmed in fiscal year 2021-22. This project will reduce truck trips on Highway 101 and Highway 1, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and promote economic growth to shippers of the Santa Maria Valley and Central Coast. This request does mark the first program allocation for the Short Line Railroad Improvement Program, if approved today. The program was adopted in January 2021 at the commission meeting. Staff has reviewed this request and it is consistent with the Short Line Railroad Improvement Program guidelines. Therefore, staff does recommend your approval of tab 119. Are there any questions?
No, we also have no public comment on item 119. Seeing no commissioners wishing to speak, could we entertain a motion?
So moved, Kehoe.
I'll
Second, Eager.
Eager will second. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much. We will now go to items 120 through 126, which will be taken together. Casey.
Tabs 120 through 124 are action items to extend the project allocation time extension for 8 STIP projects. Staff has reviewed these requests and finds them consistent with the STIP guidelines and the interim timely use of funds policy. Staff recommends approval after the final vote on tab 126.
Okay.
Move it.
Thank you very much. You presented 124. Now, is Alika and Hannah going to present on 125 and 126?
Yes, they are. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tab 125 is an action item to consider project allocation extensions for 43 projects in the Active Transportation Program. The Sonoma Marin Area Rail Trail Transit District Smart Pathway Santa Rosa to Rohnert Park, Petaluma, and Pengrove Gap Closure Project has experienced additional unforeseen delays as the agency has become subject of an unexpected federal lawsuit. Commission staff is recommending an additional 8 months as the federal lawsuit came up after the agency requested their original 12-month project allocation time extension. This will provide additional time to resolve the litigation and allow the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Trail District to continue advancing the construction of the project. Should the lawsuit be resolved prior to the deadline, the agency will advance their allocation request prior to the extension deadline. These requests are consistent with ATP guidelines and staff recommends approval after the next item.
Thank you very much. Hannah?
Yes, tab 126 is an allocation extension request. The city of Corona requests an additional 12 months for allocation. And that's because there was some court processing delays related to their land acquisition in the right-of-way phase, partially due to COVID. Staff has reviewed the request and recommends approval.
Okay, thank you. We have no public comment on 120 through 126. Commissioner Tavaloni has already moved these items. Can we have a second?
Second by Kehoe.
Thank you. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We will now take items 127 through 131 together. Sheila?
I'll be presenting item 127. This is an action item to extend the period of contract award for one roadway preservation project in Santa Clara County per shop guidelines. Staff has reviewed this item and recommends approval at the end of this section.
Thank you. Casey?
I will be presenting tabs 128 and 129. Tab 128 is an action item to extend one contract award time extension in Glenn County. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with the STIP guidelines and interim timely use of funds policy. Tab 129 is an action item to extend one contract award time extension in Los Angeles County. This request is consistent with the TIRCP allocation and interim timely use of funds policies. Staff recommends approval after the final vote on tab 131.
Thank you very much. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair Norton. Tab 130 is an action item to approve a Cycle 1 Solutions for Congested Corridors program time extension for the Airport Metro Connector 96th Street Transit Station project located in Los Angeles County. Approval of this item would extend the period of contract award for the construction phase of the project for 12 months, pushing the deadline to June 30th, 2022. This request is consistent with the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, as well as the interim timely use of funds policy. Commissioners, staff recommends your approval of tab 130 once the vote is taken after tab 131.
Okay, wonderful. Eureka?
Commissioners, tab 131 is an action item to consider contract award extensions for 3 projects in the active transportation program. These requests are consistent with ATP guidelines. Commissioners, staff recommends approval of tabs 127, 128, 129, 130, and 131 as shown in the yellow time extension table.
Thank you very much. We have no public comment on the items before us, 127 through 131. So could we entertain a motion?
So move.
Thank you. Thank you. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Madam Chair, I did not hear the second.
Tavaloni.
Thank you. Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much. We will now move to items 132 through 134. Sheila?
Thank you, Commissioner. 132 is an action item to extend the period of project completion for 2 projects per shop guidelines. Staff would like to note one correction to project number 1. The reason for delay is a result of a communication error made by Caltrans staff, not an error made by the contractor as stated in the book item. Staff recommends approval of these time extensions at the end of this section.
Thank you. Beverly?
Commissioners, tab 133 is an action item to consider project completion extensions for 2 traffic congestion relief program projects in Monterey County. For both projects, the Transportation Agency for Monterey County has experienced significant delays in securing approval of the PS&E packages from Union Pacific Railroad and Caltrain. The COVID-19 pandemic has further delayed this process. These requests are consistent with the interim timely use of funds policy and the SIP guidelines, and staff recommends approval as shown in the yellow time extension table after the presentation of tab 134.
Thank you, Beverly. We have a question from Commissioner Liu on this item.
Thank you, Chair and Beverly. I noticed that this isn't the only item on our agenda today that has been delayed, and the attribution has been to either stalled negotiations or non-responsiveness of Union Pacific Railroad. And I'm just, wondering, I've heard from staff and Commissioner Inman that some, if not all, of these problems and delays are a result of significant loss of staff at UP after they restructured the company. And so I just want to know, is this, a trend that we're seeing here? And is there something that we can or need to do about it?
Teresa, did you want to respond?
I can respond, yes. Yes, Commissioner Liu, it is a trend, and we did ask Kyle Gradinger from Caltrans if he can probably respond, because he would probably be more familiar with what the issues are with UP and how they are handling it. So, Doug, can you check to see if Kyle is on the line now? We did ask to be prepared to go on mute, off mute on this item.
He's not online.
How about Christina Watson from TAMSI?
Christina Watson is, and her mic is open. She can unmute herself.
Okay.
And we also have a public comment on this item, so.
Okay. So Christina, if you can talk about the progress you've made with UP and the issues you have faced so far, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I'm happy to. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I believe that the public comment might be from our executive director, Debbie Hale, also. So she also wants to speak to this issue. We have been coordinating with Union Pacific on this project over the life span of the project. It's described as two projects, but it's two elements of the same project, which is the extension of Caltrain service from Gilroy to Salinas. And one element is construction of work in Gilroy, and the other is construction of work in Salinas. And we are currently coordinating with Union Pacific, but there are issues, statewide that many projects have been having issues dealing with Union Pacific's responsiveness and their protocol. And I think that's what our executive director, Debbie Hale, wants to speak to.
Excellent. She is waiting in public comment. So Justin, if you could bring on Debbie Hale.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Debbie, you are now muted and free to comment.
Hi, Debbie Hale, Executive Director with the Transportation Agency for Monterey County. I appreciate the Commissioner's concerns and thoughts, and I have to say that actually Alameda County Transportation Commission has formed a task force among the regional agencies to talk about the various issues that people are experiencing with regards to Union Pacific delays and changes in their negotiating tactics. Sometimes you might think it's a therapy group, but we also invited Chad Edison to the group to talk with us. And I think that our strategy is, first of all, to try to coordinate and try to see if we can work with the state to put our asks together so that we're not being picked off one by one. And so I did talk with Teresa, and I think that I would approach the group to see if you might be interested in hearing some of the stories and some of the issues. But we do believe that there's some leveraging that could take place at a state level, since Union Pacific does get, have to ask state permission on various PUC issues and such. And so we'd welcome your assistance on that. With regards to this project in particular, we actually have gotten their attention in the last few months. And we signed a design review agreement with Union Pacific in October. And just in April, we signed an agreement for a capacity analysis. But you've hit the nail on the head with regards to the need for some sort of collaborative, coordinating statewide approach with Union Pacific if we're going to reach our statewide passenger rail service goals. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm wondering if this can be a report back, especially about the task force at our June meeting, given the progress and given that this is affecting multiple projects that we're working on. So Mitch, I was wondering whether we could ask for a report back from this group and with the presentation and invite Union Pacific, since it's negatively affecting so many of our projects with state funds.
Yes, ma'am. We can certainly do that at an upcoming meeting. It may be better to do it in August because June typically is a very long meeting, but we will look at our schedule and see when best to fit it in. But I think to the extent that we can do that and be supportive of the efforts that are going on regionally and, add the state and try to speak with one voice and, include other agencies, I think it'd be very helpful.
Thanks, Mitch. I would appreciate that in response to my concerns. And, it seems obvious that we have this sort of, partnership with UP and in that there's a lot of money that we award that benefits them directly. And there's a lot of money that we're trying to award and projects we're trying to move forward that we need their partnership and cooperation on. So, if it's not working, then we really need to iron it out.
Absolutely. And I think it needs to be opened up in this UP issue, opened up to a lot of other organizations that are trying to have these negotiations as well. So if we can make sure that we broaden this to Metrolink and others, that would be terrific, knowing that we have time now if it's going in the August meeting. Thank you very much, Mitch. Appreciate it. Hope that'll bring everybody to the table quicker. Fran, I see your video on. Are you wishing to speak on 133?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that we reach out to Adrian Guerrero from Union Pacific Railroad. He presented with our discussion on homelessness, and so I would suggest that we reach out to Adrian.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Inman. Didn't mean to call you by your first name. Okay, so with that, thank you, Beverly. We will move on to item 134 so that we can then take a motion on all of these items collectively.
Commissioners, tab 134 is an action item to consider project completion extensions for 2 projects in the active transportation program. These requests are consistent with ATP guidelines, and staff recommends approval of tabs 132, 133, and 134 as shown on the yellow time extension table.
Thank you very much. With that and the presentations we received, could we get a motion on items 132 through 134?
So moved, Kehoe.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Douglas, can you please do the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. Now we'll take tabs 135 through 144 together. Sheila?
Thank you, Chair Norton. Commissioners, item 135 is an action item to extend the period of project development for 2 projects per shop guidelines. Please note the revision on the change list clarifying the reason for delay regarding project 1 only. Staff has reviewed these items and recommends approval at the end of this section.
Okay. Michael?
Hello, Commissioners. This item 136 is a time extension request for 3 locally administered projects. Elementary is requesting a 12-month expenditure time extension to allow sufficient time to process and finalize the $3 million PS&E phase of the Cycle 1 Route 60591 project from June 2021 to June 2022. Due to the pandemic, Local sales tax revenues were low, and for cash flow reasons, Metro had the design team wait to complete a geotechnical study. This delayed both design and right-of-way. Second, LA Metro is requesting an 18-month expenditure time extension to allow sufficient time to process and finalize the $14 million right-of-way phase of the Cycle 1 Route 60591 project from June 2021 to December 2022. This would be a request under the interim timely use of funds policy because the guidelines only allow a 12-month extension. Third, LA Metro is requesting a 20-month expenditure time extension to allow sufficient time to process and finalize property acquisitions in the $5 million right-of-way phase. This moves the deadline from June 2021 to February 2023. Additional time is needed due to the reduced city office hours and delays in communicating with property owners due to the pandemic. Staff recommends approval of this item.
And Casey, for the balance of these items?
Commissioners, I will be presenting tabs 137 through 143. Tabs 137 through 140 are action items to extend the project development expenditure deadline for 4 locally administered STIP projects. Staff has reviewed these requests and finds them consistent with the STIP guidelines and interim timely use of funds policy. Tabs 141 through 143 are action items to extend the project development expenditure deadline for 3 transit and intercity rail capital program projects. These requests are consistent with the TIRCP allocation and interim timely use of funds policies. Staff recommends approval after the final vote on tab 144.
Okay. And Eureka?
Commissioners, tab 144 is an action item to consider project development expenditure time extensions for 7 projects in the active transportation program. These requests are consistent with ATP guidelines. Staff recommends approval of tabs 135 through 144 as shown on the yellow time extension table.
Okay. We have no public comment on these items. So commissioners, I will entertain a motion on items through 144.
So moved.
Tabellone, move it.
Thank you. Who was the second?
Kehoe.
Thank you, Commissioner Kehoe. Douglas, can you please do the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tabellone.
Aye.
Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. Commissioners, this will be the balance of our agenda, items 145 to 148. Sheila?
Thank you. Commissioners, item 145 is an action item to amend a previously approved contract award time extension per shop guidelines for 1 office facilities project located in the city of Los Angeles. Please note the increase in number of months originally requested from 6 months to 8 months on the change list. Staff has reviewed this item and recommends approval at the end of this section.
Thank you. Hannah?
Yes, and before I speak to 146, I just wanted to get back to Commissioner Davis really quick on tab 113, the State Route 60591 project. Just to clarify, there's a couple projects we're going to start seeing on the agenda now that we funded in both Cycle 1 and Cycle 2. And so for the 60591 project, just to clarify, the construction allocation, they haven't requested yet, and that's a Cycle 2 project. And the one that is part of tab 13 is the Cycle 1 right-of-way phase. And I'm still waiting for confirmation from LA Metro, but I don't think that they have completed their land acquisitions for 2 reasons. One, because I double-checked their paperwork, and their right-of-way phase isn't scheduled to end until July of 2022. And also, I know that there are some gas stations in there that they're trying to acquire, and that's taking longer than they expected. It's more expensive than they expected. So I think the answer to your question is no on that tab. And then on tab 146, this is for the State Route 5760 project, and it's a choke point relief project in LA. It's also one where we funded design and right of way in cycle 1, and we're funding construction in cycle 2. This request is for an expenditure extension amendment for the design phase in cycle 1. They originally needed more time because they had a minor scope change and that impacted their design. And now they're having some cash flow issues. Their local sales tax has been lower. And so they asked that the roadway and structure design packages be completed separately to slow down the progress and reduce their cash flow. And that impacted their schedule. And as a result, they're asking for the full 20 months allowable under the interim timely use of funds policy. So that would put their deadline in February of 2022. Staff recommends approval of this request.
Great, thank you so much. And now we'll go to 147 and 148, Eureka.
147 is an action item to consider amending the period of project completion time extensions for the San Mateo County Safe Routes to School for Health and Wellness Project and the Active Transportation Program. Because of the extraordinary circumstances caused by the COVID-19 pandemic resulting in school closures, the county has been unable to conduct parts of the non-infrastructure project. Therefore, Commission staff is recommending this time extension be deferred until San Mateo County is able to assess when they can successfully complete this Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure project. Tab 148 is an action item to consider amending the period of project development expenditure for the ATP Jefferson Boulevard Complete Streets project located in Los Angeles County. Staff has reviewed this time extension amendment and finds it consistent with the interim timely use of funds policy. Commissioners, staff recommends approval of tabs 145, 146, 147, and 148 as shown in the yellow time extension table.
If you see that there's no public comment, could we entertain a motion, Commissioners?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much, Davis, Tavaloni. Douglas, can you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Mayor Norton.
Aye.
Sure, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. With that, it completes our agenda. We will now move to public comment on the full meeting itself. And we have a public comment, I believe. Justin?
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. We have one written comment at this time. It comes from Mike Garabedian. He writes, does the Commission receive a report on pending project litigation or reports on individual project litigation? If there are a few, that is good, of course, which would also make it important to know about the rare cases. Thank you.
Mitch, could you answer the question posed by the public commenter?
Yes, I can. And the answer is no, we do not receive a specific report on litigation. However, we do receive project delivery reports which speak to the reasons projects are delayed, which could potentially list litigation.
Thank you very much. Justin, does that conclude our public comment on the full meeting?
I see no other public comment at this time, Chair Norton. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, we're going to move to adjourning motions. And as we had requested, I believe Caltrans has a slide for us so that we can adjourn in the name of the workers. Thank you. Contractor fatalities. I'd like to adjourn in name of Scott Fletcher, Jesus Gonzalez, Emilio Zaragoza, Victor Mendoza, and Bard Kearns. Thank you, Commissioners. And unless there are other adjourning motions, Commissioners? If not, we are adjourned.